Caleb Morris thought the long Texas highway would be nothing more than an empty drive through the desert. But when his sister Lila insisted on taking a shortcut through the backroads, they stumbled across a place that should never have existed. A gas station with lights still burning, shelves coated in dust, and walls lined with photographs of them, taken before they even arrived. What began as a simple night drive quickly unraveled into a nightmare. Neither of them could escape. The long Texas highway stretched before me, an endless ribbon of cracked asphalt glowing faintly under the pale spill of moonlight. I had been driving for hours, the clock on the dashboard ticking toward midnight, and the silence of the desert pressed against me in a way that felt unnatural. My only companions were the low hum of the engine and the occasional gust of dry wind rattling across the car windows. The landscape on either side of the road looked dead, stripped of life, as though the desert itself had given up breathing. Mesquite trees stood like brittle skeletons, and the earth was hard and cracked, veins of dust stretching into the horizon. The more I drove, the more it felt like I was moving deeper into a forgotten place, somewhere not meant for people to linger. The gas gauge on the dashboard sank lower with every mile, and a sharp unease began to grow in my chest. The thought of being stranded out here, in the endless black of Texas night, made the hair on the back of my neck prickle. I hadn't seen another car in hours. No headlights in my rearview mirror, no glow of civilization in the distance. It was as though I had slipped out of the world and into something else, a hollow in time where nothing human lived. I tried to reassure myself that a town had to be nearby, but the road signs had disappeared long ago. There were no markers, no numbers, nothing to tell me how far I had gone or where I was headed. Just as the needle threatened to kiss empty, a faint light appeared ahead. At first I thought I was imagining it, a trick of tired eyes, but as I drew closer, the glow hardened into shape. A gas station sat hunched at the side of the road, its rusted canopy barely lit by a weak fluorescent bulb. The place looked like it hadn't seen life in decades. The paint peeled in long curling strips, the windows were dark, and the pumps were cracked open like broken bones. My chest loosened with a strange relief anyway, because even an abandoned building felt better than the endless black stretching behind me. I pulled into the gravel lot, the crunch beneath my tires loud in the silence. Shutting off the engine only made the stillness heavier, as though the desert leaned in closer to listen. When I stepped out, the air was unnervingly dry, carrying no smell, no sound, no warmth, only emptiness. My boots pressed into the gravel, and every step echoed too loudly. I looked around, expecting to see the usual scraps that gather around abandoned stations, wind-blown trash, weeds curling at the edges, maybe rusting cans, but there was nothing like that here. Instead, the ground was littered with bones. At first I thought they might be pieces of wood or pale rocks scattered by the wind, but the closer I looked, the more clear it became. They were bones. Countless bones. Rabbits, coyotes, even the bleached ribs of a deer, all piled haphazardly around the building. Some were cracked in half, others splintered clean through, and they looked picked dry, stripped of flesh long ago. The longer I stared, the more I realized the ground was carpeted in them, spread out across the dirt like a macabre offering. A chill snaked through me as I tried to make sense of it. This wasn't the result of natural decay or predators scattering remains. There were too many, too concentrated, as if something had gathered them here on purpose. My eyes flicked back to the station, and suddenly the dim light above the door didn't feel like a beacon of safety anymore. It felt like bait. Still, I found myself walking closer, pulled by a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. Each step crunched over brittle bone, the sound sharp and unforgiving in the dead air. My hand hovered near the door handle, and I hesitated, suddenly aware of how far from home I was, how far from anyone who could hear me if I screamed. The silence around me wasn't just empty, it was waiting. I felt it in the stillness of the desert, in the way the shadows pressed against the edge of the light, in the way the bones seemed to grin up at me from the dirt. I reached the door, my heart thundering, and the neon light above flickered once, buzzing weakly before steadying again. The wood beneath my fingers was warm, too warm for the night air, as though something had pressed against it recently. I swallowed hard, trying to calm the rising panic clawing at my chest. Every nerve in my body told me to turn back, to get in the car and drive until I was free of this place, but my curiosity was stronger. Before I could push the door open, I caught sight of something in the corner of the lot, half hidden in shadow. At first I thought it was another pile of bones, but then I realized it wasn't scattered like the others. It was arranged. Vertebrae, ribs, and skulls, stacked in a careful pattern that curved upward like a twisted arch. The bones gleamed white in the moonlight, forming a shape that seemed less like an accident and more like a marker, a sign, or a warning. The desert wind shifted, carrying with it the faintest rattle as though the bones themselves were breathing. And in that moment, I understood that I wasn't alone out here at all. Something had been here before me. Something was still here now, watching, waiting, and maybe even smiling at the thought that I had finally arrived. I stood frozen in the gravel lot, the moon casting a pale glow over the sea of bones. The sight of them gnawed at my mind, their empty shapes whispering silent questions I didn't want answers to. My breath caught in my throat, but still I moved forward, drawn toward the station's door as though pulled by invisible hands. Each crunch of bone beneath my boots was sharp, echoing in the silence. A reminder that I had stepped into a place that wasn't abandoned after it was inhabited by something far older, far hungrier. Inside, the air was heavy, stale with the weight of dust and rust. The faint light from the flickering bulb outside spilled across cracked tiles and broken shelves. Most of the items were long gone, stripped away by time, but what remained had rotted into something unrecognizable. Cans rusted through, labels peeling, bags torn open with nothing inside but a fine layer of grit. Cobwebs hung thick in the corners, and every surface wore a film of neglect so complete that it felt like the place had been sealed off from the living world. Yet what unsettled me most wasn't the decay, it was the footprints. They tracked clearly across the dust-covered floor, fresh, sharp-edged, and deliberate. They were bare, long, and narrow, pressed into the dirt, as though someone had just walked through minutes before I arrived. My heart lurched when I noticed they didn't belong to just one person. There were at least two sets, overlapping, weaving in and out of the aisles before disappearing into the back hallway. A scratching sound stirred the silence. It was faint at first, so faint I thought it was only the wind pressing against the old frame of the building. But then it grew sharper, steadier, dragging across wood in a rhythm that set my teeth on edge. The sound was coming from the back, somewhere down that narrow hallway where the footprints disappeared. I swallowed hard, every instinct screaming to leave, but my legs carried me forward anyway. The closer I moved, the stronger the smell became, a strange mix of rust and something sweet, something that made my stomach tighten. My fingertips brushed the walls as I crept along, and I realized they weren't stained with dust alone. Faint smears streaked across the wood, dark and flaking, as though something had been dragged through. The hallway ended at a door slightly ajar. The scratching was louder now, steady and patient, like claws carving into wood just beyond the threshold. My hand shook as I pushed the door open, and the weak light from the hallway spilled into the room beyond. What I saw froze me in place. The walls were covered with photographs. Dozens of them, taped haphazardly, curling at the edges from each one captured the same stretch of highway, the very road I had just driven down. Some were taken in daylight, some at dusk, some under moonlight, but they were all of the same empty road. As my eyes scanned the collection, I saw a pattern emerging. The photos were taken closer and closer to the gas station, inch by inch, mile by mile. My stomach twisted when I reached the last set. The angle was unmistakable, the lighting identical to the night outside. It was the view of the road just before the gas station came into sight. And there, in the center of the photograph, sat my car. A wave of cold dread washed over me. Someone had been following me, watching me, capturing every mile I drove without me realizing. I staggered back, my pulse hammering, my mind racing with questions I didn't want to voice. How long had I been watched? Why me? And worse, where was the person who took these photos now? The scratching sound stopped. Silence pressed in thick and suffocating, as if the very walls of the building were listening. I turned, heart pounding, and the air in the hallway felt heavier than before, charged with something unseen. My boots scraped across the dusty floor as I stumbled back toward the counter at the front, desperate for the faint comfort of the moonlight outside. That was when I saw the keys. They sat on the counter, placed with care on the layer of dust. Old, rusted, attached to a faded tag with numbers scrawled in black marker. County Road 191. The letters were smudged, but still clear enough to read. I had never heard of the road before, yet the sight of it filled me with a heavy dread, as though it wasn't just a direction but an invitation. The silence deepened, settling into my bones. I looked down and noticed something I had missed before. The footprints in the dust, the ones that led to the back, were no longer only in front of me. New ones had appeared behind me, fresh and crisp, trailing along the floor and stopping only a few feet from where I stood. I didn't need to look up to know I wasn't alone anymore. The silence had shifted, no longer empty but breathing, waiting, and watching from the shadows. And as the neon light outside flickered, the thought gnawed at me. Maybe I hadn't found this gas station by accident. Maybe I had been led here. My chest tightened as I stared at the fresh footprints in the dust, each one pressed deep, the shape unnervingly clear. They were so close to me, closer than anything should have been without me hearing it move. I could feel the weight of the air change, heavier, pressing against my skin like damp cloth. My breath was shallow, uneven, and every instinct screamed for me to run, but I stood frozen, unable to decide if moving would draw whatever was near me closer, or if staying still would make me an easier target. The silence felt alive. It wasn't the kind of quiet that belonged to abandoned places or empty deserts. It was calculated, expectant, like something was holding its breath, waiting for me to make the first mistake. I forced myself to step backward, careful not to make too much noise, but even the faint crunch of grit beneath my boots sounded too loud, echoing off the walls in a way that didn't seem natural. I turned toward the counter again, my eyes catching the keys with the faded County Road 191 tag. They seemed out of place, as if left deliberately, waiting for me to take them. My thoughts spiraled, trying to piece together why they were here. A clue, a trap. My mind pushed the possibilities away. But the unease in my stomach told me that whatever road those keys belonged to, it wasn't one I should ever travel. I moved quickly toward the front of the store, desperate for the cold air of the night, desperate to put distance between myself and the silence that clung to the hall. The door creaked louder than I remembered as I pushed it open, and I stumbled into the gravel lot. The bones scattered across the ground gleamed white under the moonlight, almost glowing, as though mocking my fear. My car sat exactly where I had left it, waiting like a fragile lifeline. Relief washed over me in a sharp wave as I slid into the driver's seat and locked the doors. The steering wheel was cool beneath my trembling hands. I told myself over and over that I would just drive, that I wouldn't stop until I saw lights, until I saw proof that the world I knew still existed. My mind clawed for normality, but the hollow weight in my chest whispered that nothing about tonight would ever be normal again. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine coughed once, then roared to life. My headlights burst across the front of the station, cutting through the shadows, and that was when I saw it. A figure stood against the wall of the building, directly in the center of my headlights. Tall, thin, motionless. Its shape was human but wrong. The limbs stretched too long, the angles of the body sharp and unnatural. It wasn't blurred or hidden. It stood boldly in the light, as though it wanted me to see it, as though it had been waiting for me to finally notice. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly that the bones in my knuckles ached. My body screamed to move, to drive, to flee. But I sat frozen, locked in place by fear so heavy it felt like chains. My pulse thundered in my ears, and for a moment I swore I could hear it answer back another rhythm of breath, deep and steady, filling the car even though no one else was inside. I blinked, just once, and in that instant, the figure was gone. The empty wall reflected in my headlights again, but the image of that tall, thin form burned into my vision. My body finally obeyed, and I pressed my foot hard against the accelerator. The tires spun on the gravel before gripping, and the car lurched forward onto the highway. The station shrank in the rearview mirror, swallowed by the darkness of the desert, but the dread inside me didn't fade. If anything, it grew heavier. The road stretched out endlessly, my headlights cutting a narrow path through the night. No signs, no towns, no other cars. It was as though I was the last person left in Texas, the last person left alive. My GPS screen was black, useless, and the landscape outside looked warped in the corners of my vision, the desert shifting into twisted shapes I couldn't name. I told myself that what I had seen was a trick of the light, exhaustion playing tricks on my mind, but deep down, I knew better. It had been real. It had been there, standing in the light without fear, and its sudden disappearance meant it wasn't gone, it was somewhere else now. Somewhere close, moving in ways I couldn't see. My foot pressed harder on the gas, the engine straining as the miles blurred beneath me. I kept my eyes fixed on the road, terrified that if I looked in the mirror again, I wouldn't see an empty backseat. I would see something waiting, crouched low, smiling in the dark. The silence of the desert wrapped around me again, and for the first time since leaving the station, I realized I couldn't hear my own breathing anymore. Only the sound of something else, faint and steady, keeping pace with me in the dark. The road unfurled endlessly before me, two thin lanes cutting through the darkness, swallowed by the desert on either side. My headlights stretched out over the cracked asphalt, flickering every now and then as if the car itself was struggling against the night. My heart still hammered from the moment at the station, and every muscle in my body felt tight, braced for something I couldn't see but knew was near. I pressed the accelerator harder, desperate to put miles between me and whatever had stood in that beam of light. But the deeper I drove, the more the desert seemed to twist into something unfamiliar. The landscape that had once been sparse and predictable began to shift into grotesque shapes. The cactus and mesquite trees looked wrong, their limbs bent in unnatural angles, their shadows stretching too far across the ground, too tall for what they should have been. The stars above should have offered comfort, but even they seemed dim, as though a heavy veil was being drawn across the sky. The silence pressed in harder now, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the groan of the engine and the tires rolling over the cracked pavement. I glanced at the dashboard, hoping for reassurance, but the GPS screen was still black, the clock frozen on the same minute it had displayed back at the station. The fuel gauge hadn't moved either. It was as though time itself had stopped, and I was trapped in an endless stretch of road that had no destination, no end. A crawling unease built in my chest, a whisper that I hadn't left the station at all, that I was still inside it, trapped in some loop meant to keep me driving forever. Then I saw it. The figure appeared again, standing in the middle of the road ahead. My headlights caught its outline, clearly tall, thin, impossibly still. The same distorted body, the same sense that its limbs were too long, its presence too deliberate. It didn't move, didn't react to the roar of my car as I barreled toward it. I swerved at the last second, the tires screaming against the asphalt, and the car veered violently into the dirt shoulder. The wheel fought against me as I tried to regain control, the vehicle shaking so hard I thought it might roll. Somehow, I managed to pull it back onto the pavement, the engine whining in protest. When I looked in the rearview mirror, the road behind me was empty. No figure, no shadow, just endless black stretching into the distance. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, sweat slicking my palms. I told myself I was imagining it, that exhaustion had clawed its way into my mind and was painting shapes where none existed. But deep down, I knew the truth. It was real, and it wasn't standing on the road by accident. It was waiting for me. Minutes bled into hours, or maybe seconds. Time didn't feel right anymore. The world outside the car looked less like Texas desert and more like a place stripped of rules, a liminal stretch where nothing living belonged. The silence became unbearable. I rolled the window down, desperate for air, but what poured in wasn't relief. It was cold, unnaturally cold for the desert night, carrying with it no scent, no sound, just emptiness so thick it made my lungs ache. That was when I heard it, breathing, slow, steady, deliberate. It wasn't mine. It didn't match the shallow, panicked rhythm of my own lungs. It was deeper, calmer, as though whatever was making the sound had all the time in the world to wait for me to notice. It came from behind me, soft at first, almost blended into the hum of the car, but unmistakable once I heard it. I froze, my eyes locked on the road ahead. My body screamed to turn, to look into the back seat, but terror held me rigid. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining it, but the sound grew louder, closer, filling the car with its unnatural calm. My heart raced so violently I thought it might burst, and still I couldn't bring myself to look. Finally, unable to take it any longer, I forced my eyes upward, toward the rearview mirror. My breath caught in my throat. For a split second, the shadows in the back seat shifted. I saw a movement, something pale, crouched low, pressed into the corner where the dim light of the dashboard barely reached. Two faint pinpricks of reflection caught the glow, like eyes watching me, unblinking, patient. I jerked my gaze back to the road, my grip on the wheel tightening until my knuckles throbbed. The breathing never stopped. It stayed steady, filling the space around me, closer now. As if whatever had been waiting outside the station hadn't just followed. MIT was already inside the car, sharing the same stale air, inching closer with every mile I drove into the dark. I drove with my eyes locked on the road, refusing to look into the rearview mirror again. Every part of me knew what I had seen, the pale shape crouched low, the faint glow of eyes, but my mind clawed for denial. If I didn't look, maybe it wouldn't be real. If I just kept moving, maybe it would vanish like smoke. The steady breathing behind me proved otherwise. It filled the car in rhythm with the growl of the engine, calm and patient, the sound of something that knew I had nowhere to go. The road itself felt endless. No towns appeared, no signs. The fuel gauge stayed frozen, the clock unmoving, the GPS blank. I pressed harder on the gas pedal, but the car felt sluggish, as if dragging through molasses. The headlights stretched into darkness, illuminating only the same cracked asphalt over and over, a loop of nothing. My heart pounded as I realized I might never escape, that maybe I wasn't on any real road anymore, but some hollow imitation of one. The breathing shifted. It grew slower, heavier, as though whatever sat in the back seat was leaning closer, savoring the tension, letting me feel its presence pressing against my skin without touching. Cold air swept across my neck, so sharp it burned. My hands shook violently on the wheel, and I whispered inside my head, begging myself not to look, not to brake. But the car betrayed me. The engine sputtered, once, twice, then died. The lights cut out, plunging the world into darkness so absolute I felt blinded. My car rolled to a stop in the middle of the deserted highway, the silence crushing me like a weight. For a moment, the breathing behind me ceased too, and that absence was even worse. My own lungs seized, waiting for the sound to return, knowing the stillness meant only one thing: it was moving. I sat paralyzed in the driver's seat, hands locked to the wheel, staring into the void outside the windshield. I told myself if I didn't move, if I didn't turn, maybe it wouldn't see me, but I could feel it shifting in the back, the weight of the seat cushions dipping, the faint scrape of nails dragging against the fabric. The air grew colder still, as though the desert itself had frozen solid around me. And then it touched me. The lightest brush of fingernails against my shoulder, grazing the fabric of my shirt. My skin erupted in chills, and a strangled gasp escaped my throat. I whipped around without meaning to, unable to resist any longer. The back seat was empty. The pale shape, the eyes, the breathing on, only shadows pooled in the corners, thick and unnatural. For a heartbeat I almost believed I had imagined it all, that exhaustion and fear had twisted reality. But when I turned back to the windshield, the road outside was no longer empty. Something stood directly in front of the car. It was the figure, the tall and impossibly thin shape, its face hidden in shadow though there was enough moonlight to see everything else. Its arms stretched down far too long, its posture rigid, unnatural. It didn't move, it didn't need to. Its presence was enough to fill every corner of me with dread so sharp it felt like my ribs were cracking. Before I could react, the world blinked. The road vanished, the figure vanished, the desert, the car, the night all swallowed into suffocating blackness. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying flat on cracked asphalt. The sky above me was washed with faint color. The first light of dawn bleeding across the horizon. My car was gone. The station was gone. Even the bones scattered across the ground had vanished. I sat up slowly, every muscle trembling, my hands raw from the rough pavement. The road stretched endlessly in both directions, empty, silent, unreal. That was when I noticed something placed carefully beside me. A photograph. I picked it up with shaking hands, the faded edges curling, the image grainy but clear. My stomach turned as I recognized the scene. It was me, standing outside the broken gas station from the night before, my face pale in the glow of the flickering neon sign. I wasn't looking at the camera by accident, I was staring straight into the lens, wide-eyed, as if I had known I was being watched. A chill spread through me as I realized the truth. Whoever had been taking those photos hadn't just been following me. They had been waiting, leading me down that road on purpose, step by step, until I ended up here. The worst part wasn't the photo itself, it's the fact that the station behind me in the picture looked whole, alive, its windows glowing with light, its pumps standing tall as though it had never been abandoned. I let the photograph slip from my fingers, but before it touched the ground, I heard it again. That same slow, steady breathing. Not behind me this time. Not from the back seat of a car. It came from everywhere, from the still desert air itself, as if the entire stretch of road had been waiting all along. The dawn sky brightened overhead, but no warmth touched me. I was still in the dark, trapped in a place where the line between road and nightmare no longer existed, and the worst realization of all settled deep inside. I hadn't escaped anything. I had only just arrived.